Hey there, art nerds. Today, we're taking a look at a watercolor set that you guys requested. We're taking a look at the SeamiArt Watercolor set. So I've heard good things about this one, but does the hype live up to the performance? There's only one way to find out. Let's get started. Art nerds, you guys voted for it, and today we're taking a look at the SeamiArt watercolors. This is a 90 half pan set with 50 basic colors, 36 shimmer colors, and 4 neons. So I've been particularly interested in taking a look at SeamiArt watercolors because they've gotten some pretty good reviews over on my Discord server, the Paint Box, with some people really enjoying them. Now you can find much smaller sets over on AliExpress, or you can find these larger sets like this one here on Amazon. I purchased this one on Amazon out of pocket using funds provided by my amazing patrons on Patreon for $29.69 or about $30. So SeamiArt watercolors are produced by Shoshan Shenglan Trade Company Limited, and I apologize for my pronunciation. And I did the research for this review during Hurricane Ida, so if there are holes in my information, please be a sweetie, let me know down in the comments below what I have missed. But I was able to find a fair bit of info from the SeamiArt Facebook after doing some digging. So Shoshan or Zhushan Shenglang Trade Co. Limited is a professional manufacturer of watercolor, painting brush, drawing paper markers, waterbrush pen, etc. And it was founded new in 2020, according to their Facebook. Their products are extensively used in Europe, the USA, and Southeast Asia with good quality, reasonable prices, and stylish designs. They also offer OBM, OEM, and ODM services. And if those phrases are new to you like they were to me, an OEM service refers to the supplier's ability and willingness to make products according to the buyer's design. So basically everybody on AliExpress, a lot of people on Amazon, etc., make OEM or make or sell OEM products. And that is from ChinaImportal.com. OEM stands for Original Equipment Manufacturer, and it refers to a manufacturer that provides goods or manpower to bring a product to market. OEM often produce something that is used as a component to a product and is typically associated with a type of services called OEM services. So you guys might remember our Shapiro Farben palette. That was probably an OEM palette, a palette manufactured and then sold to a bunch of different watercolor suppliers so that they don't have to make their own palettes. So basically, if you're a manufacturer and you don't have the capabilities to design, create, test, and brand your own products, you could or should offer OEM manufacturing and provide basic manufacturing services to help businesses mass produce products. So those companies that seem to sell a little bit of everything, or those like kind of new to the scene art supply companies like Art and Fly, are probably using OEM manufacturing. So if you're a contract manufacturer that offers OEM services on Alibaba, you can claim your OEM capacity on your digital storefront, and you can showcase your professional certifications and third-party approvals to enhance your credibility to buyers. And all of this is coming from, or almost all of this, minus my own asides, is coming from the Alibaba blog. I will link that in the description below for you guys. I just think this is really interesting because we talk about white label products a lot, and it can be really hard to figure out who manufactured what for who. So what about an ODM? An ODM is an original design manufacturer, and it's a company that has the capabilities to design, develop, manufacture, and sell products themselves. And so OEM is referred to as a service, ODM is referred to as a product. The products an ODM creates are often rebranded by a buyer, so like white labeling, as private label products and are sold for a profit. So you're buying them wholesale, remarketing them, rebranding them a bit like that Etcher watercolor set, and then, you know, charging a fee for that. Unlike an OEM, which relies on client brief and product design to manufacture items, so the client would have to provide that information. An ODM designs and develops products independently or in collaboration with a client. This is the ideal manufacturing service if you have a great idea but have yet to design, develop, test, or brand it. So if you're an artist like myself and you want to make your own art supplies to sell because you have this huge audience who'd be willing to support it, you could probably go the ODM route. If you're a manufacturer and have employees or teams who have skills, experience, and capabilities to design products, develop them, and carry out testing, you'll be able to market yourself as an ODM. And like I said, that's all from the AliExpress or the Alibaba blog, so I'll link that in the description below because I found that really interesting and it sheds some light on some topics we've been talking about a lot as we are reviewing these student grade products. So I've heard some decent things about the SeamiArt watercolors in the paint box, and I thought it'd be really fun to give it a shot and see how well I do with it. So I'm also gonna have links to their AliExpress and their Facebook down in the description if you guys are interested in that as well. SeamiArt also makes color pencils, wooden drawing pencils, watercolor pencils, brushes, art markers, and they carry the Potentate products, which is such a blast from the past because I remember I reviewed their markers years ago. And markers. Many of their products are either white labeled or they're carrying someone else's product in their shop, or they're manufacturing these products for someone else. Sometimes it can get a little bit difficult to chase that rabbit hole all the way down to the bottom. So like I said, this has 50 normal colors, 36 shimmer colors, 4 neon colors. It also comes with a water brush. It claims to use high quality solid pigments and promises not to be chalky. I'll be the judge of that. There are other set sizes available, like the 50 color sets that also include brushes, as well as the 12 color theme sets, which I think are really cute. That's what originally got me interested in SeamiArt. And that would be like Ocean, Forest, Skin, Candy, and Morandi. And I'll link those for you guys as well. This, like I said, was purchased on Amazon. It arrived shrink wrapped in a cardboard box. The back pretty much says what I described to you guys. We do have the handy Amazon sticker, which sometimes makes it a little bit easier to figure out exactly who they're marketing to. So this says, for kids, adult beginners, kid artists, art, painting, artworks, portable travel. And it's a new item, and it was made in China. And I'm going to go ahead and remove our shrink wrap. Hopefully this is the only shrink wrap we're dealing with today. I would, honestly, I would love that. Because when I do these reviews, there's often so much just plastic waste that ends up in the garbage afterwards. All right, so there goes our shrink wrap. I like the design on the outside of the box. I think this is the gift box. It's in a little bit better shape than that extra box was. Okay, and then inside is some additional foam packaging. So it's like a foam bag. And then inside that is a metal palette. For some reason I thought I was getting the blue palette, but I might like the plain metal palette better. Has a metal clasp. Is there anything on the other side? No. Let's move these. All right, y'all ready for the reveal? So I'm pretty sure the Totoro stickers are bootleg. Just a thought. And then there's like a bunch of teeny tiny little Christmas stickers. I don't really know where SeamiArt is going with this. I don't think these are art made by someone using their palette because this is digital art. I don't think these are either, but all right. Inside, we have a black sheet of paper, probably to protect one set of pigments from the other. We have a watercolor swatch card, and this seems to be on, I think it's for this top one. No, it doesn't matter. No. Maybe like this? Yes. Okay. All right, so it's for this side, but then is this maybe to swatch these? Except this has no texture on it whatsoever. We'll figure that out in a second. We've got a very, very small water brush. And those of you guys who have watched my reviews before, y'all know I just don't love water brushes all that much. So generally, I take a look at it, but I'm not going to really speak too much to it because I'm already not a fan of water brushes. That's not really detrimental to this review. It's just a note of bias for you guys. So inside we have our 90 colors our 50 basic, and then our 36 shimmer, and then our, is there 5 neon? That doesn't even look like 5. It looks like, oh, okay, never mind. 4 neons up here. These are in very flimsy plastic trays, although the plastic trays seem to be in here. This one's in here really good. This one, not so much. This one could come out, like if you were taking a particularly bumpy airplane ride, this might, yeah. Oh, those are like really cheap trays. I'm not gonna mess with that too much. I don't wanna break them. And these are obviously extruded paint chiclets that have then been put in the holder, which is not necessarily the worst thing. I mean, the Mei Liang pigments palette that I reviewed a while back and that I love and that I'm always recommending to you guys has very, very similar qualities to this palette. So, you know, I'm going to reserve judgment, but I am pointing out that compared to some of the other palettes I reviewed, the build quality is not all that impressive. But you do get a lot of colors, so this could definitely be a great set maybe for a card maker, a hand letterer, somebody who wants a lot of those shimmer and special effects colors, maybe a commission artist. I mean, the only way we're really going to know how good this is by swatching it. So just focusing on the palette itself, I can already see some areas that give me some concern. So any of these folding palettes where you fold it on top of itself or where you collapse it, like with that Superior folding palette I reviewed not too long ago, you have to wait until the paints are completely dry before you shut it because they have a high tendency to drip or leak onto the other pans. Another concern I have is that if these do crack or they start to crumble with use, they could fall into these pans and pollute it. So there's a pretty easy solution to that. You just put a sheet of paper the same size as this in between the two halves. That will help a lot. But it's that, or shoot, you could even do like some cellophane because this will still shut even around the cellophane. But that's really my main concern with that. Now, this is a fairly heavy little metal palette. I like the shut mechanism. The box itself seems decently built. You could totally customize it, Posca marker it, cover it with stickers, whatever. My other concern, and it's not really a big one, it's the same for any metal palette, is if you're going through TSA, just go ahead and pull it out so they can see what it is. I do that with watercolor tubes as well if I travel with them in my carry-on, because if they can see what it is, it's less likely to get flagged and less likely to be a hassle. And since this is a metal container, you know, sometimes it's just easier to go ahead and do that. So these are, given the mass tones, we can see what these colors are, right? These are probably definitely student grade watercolors, but that doesn't necessarily make them awful. So first off, I want to go ahead and swatch these, at least these here. And I'm probably going to switch the shimmer or swatch the shimmer on this paper. This paper is not a watercolor paper. It doesn't even have a texture to it. It's not even cardstock. But I figured they'd included this as a swatch for the shimmer colors. So I'm going to swatch the normal colors on the included swatch sheet here. And then I'll swatch the neons and the shimmer on this here. I am not going to use a water brush for this because I'm heavy-handed and I have water control issues when it comes to water brushes. So I'm going to swatch it with just a regular watercolor brush. to start by taping down their included palette map just to make sure that it doesn't really buckle, kip, and that colors don't run into each other or pool. This is a cellulose paper, so it's really not the best reflection of what these colors are going to have to offer. And generally, I would do like a half and half swatch where I gradiate it out, but I'm just going to do a full color swatch here so we can really get a feel for the mass tones. So with the regular colors, it's kind of hard to get a feel for these because the cellulose isn't really the best reflection of what these paints might have to offer. Some of the colors seem kind of off to me, like the burnt umber, the burnt sienna, the raw umber, and the red ochre. It's like they went for much cheaper pigments that don't granulate at all. And some of these colors, and I'm not talking about the pastels, are definitely chalky. The Alizarin Crimson is the prime culprit here. That's more of a pink than something that's supposed to be a very blue red. So I want to make sure to show you guys my swatch water in between rows so you guys can get an idea for how many optical brighteners are included in this set. Now, I have to be fair. Around $30 for 96 watercolors. It's like, what? 3 for $1. That's generally not the best sign of quality, but I have heard good things about the SeamiArt watercolors and I wanted to give them a fair shot. This student grade showdown isn't about finding the worst watercolors and then tearing them apart. It's about finding promising, affordable watercolors that might be overlooked, or they might be marketed to a demographic and it might appeal to a different demographic as well. So what I'm really trying to do is I'm trying to find some winners here. And I have to say, I have found a lot of student grade watercolors that are quite affordable that I would happily recommend and that I'm happy to use myself. So there have already been some successes in this series. And if you're interested in finding the right affordable watercolor for you, if you're interested in finding a great deal on a budget, I hope you guys will check out my student grade watercolor series. But if you're short on time, I am going to compare this palette against some of the entries in that series so that you guys can make an informed and educated decision about which watercolors are right for you. Because the number one thing I want to do with these reviews is I want to make watercolor more accessible to more people. So that means finding watercolors that work well at a lower price point, that work well for a variety of budgets, and cheap watercolors that just flat out work well. Because if you're unhappy while you're using these, you're probably not going to pursue watercolors. These are going to end up on a shelf somewhere forgotten, and you're just going to probably assume that watercolor isn't for you. And I really want to make watercolor something that more people can enjoy. The regular colors haven't dried fully, but I went ahead and I taped down that included piece of black paper. I can only assume it's to demonstrate the shimmers and the neons. And I feel like the shimmers seem like they don't really have a lot of oomph. They do dry a bit more opaque and shimmery. On the black paper, the neons definitely seem a bit chalky. And this is just a black sheet of paper. It's not black cardstock. It's not black watercolor paper. It's not even a heavier paper. So it's not really well suited for this test. But since my black papers are all packed up right now, I figured I would make use of it. Now, there are a lot of special effects, interference, and shimmer watercolors on the market. I have a big old metallic watercolor showdown that I think you guys will enjoy, but I don't really enjoy these particular shimmer watercolors. You gotta kind of scrub at them. They just don't really have a lot of oomph to them, and I don't really find the colors to be saturated enough or pretty. But if you are looking for some fun shimmery watercolors, Fine Tech makes some excellent shimmery watercolors, and you can also get them open stock, so you could choose to just get a couple of colors and mix in your traditional watercolors with them to get the colors you need. Because for these shimmery watercolors, these all have or almost all of them have a white mica base. This would be super easy to mix with just a pearl Fine Tech and your own regular watercolors. So as we finish up, here is a short time lapse of our shimmer watercolors drying. You guys can see there's not a lot to them. I feel like it's kind of hard to get a feel for these on the papers they've included. This is a cellulose watercolor paper, and it's not a particularly good one, so I feel like it's not really reflecting the best that these watercolors have to offer. And then this, for all I know, it was just a sheet of paper to kind of protect one layer from the other layer. So, of course, I need to do my swatching on my standard, the Blick Studio watercolor paper. So I'll go ahead and remove these now that they've dried, remove them from the table. So that's our top row, our regular colors. And I am seeing some chalkiness, despite SeamiArt saying no chalkiness. And then this is our shimmery colors and our fluorescents, which I think look very chalky on this black paper. 90 colors is a lot to swatch, so I'm going to do this in 2 batches. We're going to start with the 50, which is still a lot to swatch, the 50 regular colors, and then we're going to move on to the shimmer and the neons. And I'm going to try to dig up my Stonehenge Aqua black watercolor paper, but considering I just moved, that might not be feasible. So I might be swatching these on white cotton rag watercolor paper instead. So to start, I've got my block of Blick, and I need to divvy this out, and I'm basically just going to follow what they've already done here, except slightly larger. So we're gonna have 5 rows with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 each. So this is going to be a little bit different from how I normally swatch watercolors because we have so many colors to swatch. Usually I would do like maybe 4 lines with 12 per line if I absolutely had to push it, because usually I want to give my watercolors enough room for the washout. But we have 96 colors to get through here, so I'm doing something very similar to what I did when I reviewed the Cool Bank watercolors. Now, I do not have my alcohol marker handy, so I'm cheating a bit, and I am using a black waterproof Pentel brush pen to create the lines, and this is going to help us gauge opacity. So for these swatches, I'm trying to do a mass tone and a washout, and I'm looking for a few different properties. I'm looking for possible color separation with the cheaper pigments. I'm looking for chalkiness and opacity, and those are not the same thing. Chalkiness is a bad thing, opacity can be a good thing. I'm looking for granulation, I'm looking for liftability, which I'll test later, and I'm looking to see how well these kind of wash, how the color moves. These are slow to activate if you let them dry, and they take some scrubbing. In fact, they take a lot of scrubbing if you let them dry. I'm kind of curious what they're using for the binder for these. And these are definitely full of optical brighteners, and there's also a fair number of pastels in this set. There's a number of possibly promising colors for florals, but I also find these seem to lack any real saturation or color depth. You get a lot of color with this set, but these are really middle of the road as far as watercolors go to me. They're just not really that great, and there's a lot of cheaper alternatives or similarly priced alternatives that I think you guys will like a lot better. I'm not really seeing a lot of granulation, if any, but I am seeing a lot of chalkiness in my rinse water, and while none of these colors are really duplicates, I would have preferred more purples and greens over all the shimmer colors. It's hard to describe this to someone who's not really familiar with watercolor, so I feel bad relying on it, but these are really one note for me. There's no real granulation. There's not really a lot of diversity in how these paints handle. You get a lot of colors, but they have a very kind of clean coloring book feel to them that just doesn't really lend much to my imagination. I'm not like excited to do the field tests for these, which isn't really a good sign. They're not the worst I've ever used. I've certainly reviewed worse watercolors for you guys before, but there's nothing that really lights a spark with these, which is kind of disappointing. So because these shimmer colors are just so oomphless, I guess. They don't have much impact. I'm not going to do a washout with these. I'm just trying to do straight up mass tone, as saturated as possible. And these are particularly slow to activate, and they don't really seem to have a lot of color or a lot of shimmer. So the paints themselves on the nice cotton rag paper don't have a whole lot of opacity. There's definitely some, but there's also a lot of really translucent colors. But they also don't have a lot of oomph or color to them. There just isn't a lot of personality to this palette. And the shimmer colors definitely leave me pretty disappointed. They're a lot like what you'd get out of a children's palette, even on this cotton rag paper. The colors themselves have this children's grade feel that I can't quite articulate, and they just really leave me wanting more, especially compared to some of the other student grade inexpensive watercolors that I've reviewed recently. These are really slow to activate. I really had to scrub them, especially if you let them dry out. So there's kind of a fine line between them being kind of glopping up onto your brush and just like you're scrubbing and scrubbing and scrubbing and scrubbing to get any color. So these swatches were done after I pre-activated them, and not even an hour had passed, like 30 minutes tops had passed between this and me working on the bigger swatch sheet, and these had basically dried out. There isn't any sort of binder in them that seems to be hydrophilic and that would hold on to the moisture like a honey-based binder or even a good quality gum arabic-based binder. I mean, I don't know a lot about their binder information, to be honest. They might be using gum arabic, they might be using something else, but I think they have a lot of optical brighteners in them that are causing them, like, you know, chalk or calcium carbonate will like absorb atmospheric moisture and then just leave them still kind of dry. These are sort of like that too. And they're really full of optical brighteners. I know they promise not to get too chalky, and they're not really that chalky on the paper, but there isn't really any granulation either. Honestly, I'm really kind of struggling to talk about these because there's just not a lot going for them, in my opinion. They're very middle of the road for me. I mean, I've reviewed much cheaper watercolors that I liked a lot better, and I've reviewed some really expensive watercolors that I absolutely loved, and I think I might like these less than I like the Cool Bank watercolors. So that should give you guys some idea of where these are currently falling for me right now. Maybe I'm just having an off day though, but they're just really not doing it for me. The color themselves, the normal colors, they don't really have much color. You can't get much depth, you can't get much saturation, you're not really getting any granulation. It's just kind of very one note. It is what it is. It is the colors that it is. I know that sounds obvious, but I'm usually looking for a little bit more, even with really inexpensive watercolors. And it's not like these don't activate. It's not like these aren't paints. It's not like you can't paint with them. It's just they leave me wanting a lot more than what they're giving me right now. And for the shimmery ones, they kind of remind me of what you might get out of the children's section, even on a high quality cotton rag watercolor paper. So I'm just kind of miffed about these. They're not the worst thing I've ever reviewed, but they're not far off either. And having heard such good things about them, I kind of feel like maybe I'm just missing a beat. So next, I'm going to do the color mixing tests. I'm going to let this all dry out overnight and come back to it tomorrow. This doesn't happen to me too often, but I got kind of burnt out while swatching these, which is not a good sign. Usually, I end up feeling enthused and thinking of all the ideas that I can use for the field test, but with these, I just felt kind of worn out and had to take a lot of breaks. Okay. So let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. All right, I didn't really like the SeamiArt watercolors while we were swatching. Fine. I didn't really like them on their swatch paper either. Okay. And the shimmer colors are just not really doing it for me. Okay, but that doesn't mean we've tested everything there is to test here. So next, I'm going to do some color mixing. I'm not going to try to mix all, 96 colors? No. We're going to ignore those shimmer colors because, to be real, Fine Tech has already won my heart. So instead, we're going to focus on some of the regular colors, and we're going to see how well these mix to make secondary colors. We're going to be testing two different types of color mixing. We're going to be testing optical and atomic. We're going to start with the grid for the optical. So basically, I am making a stripe of warm yellow, warm red, cool red, warm blue, and cool blue, or the closest approximations I can find, because this set is just really kind of weird and it feels like it's missing some colors despite boasting 96 colors. I'm going to let those dry fully. I'm going to do my atomic mixing where I mash two colors to make a secondary color, and then once that's dried, I'm going to go back and I'm going to do the second layer, the glaze, on top of our optical mixing. And it's really important that I test out both types of mixing, because as a watercolor illustrator, somebody who paints watercolor comics and watercolor illustrations, I typically create these illustrations that have loads and loads of layers, lots of saturation, lots of color. So I need to be able to test out as many common watercolor techniques as possible with these, so I know what they're capable of and I can actually speak to them with, some actual education. So with the optical, the Prussian blue, which would be the closest to a cool blue, and the ultramarine are really close, like basically the same color when side by side. So there isn't really a warm blue other than that cobalt blue, which isn't really a warm blue either. Now, surprisingly, and we'll see this in a moment, you can glaze these and they don't reactivate. Like, seriously, color me surprised. Everything I've been testing lately has reactivated. As for atomic mixing, like when we manually mix the two colors together, I am able to mix secondary colors, greens, oranges, purples, but all color mixes are just kind of muted and fairly unimpressive. These top out with saturation, so I'd say you're best served using this for a more pastel, lighter hand watercolor piece, and maybe limit your deeper saturation needs to specific things. I'm sort of getting Mia vibes from this palette. These are also getting used up kind of quickly. I could see someone who uses this palette regularly going through this thing really quick, which is just kind of a false economy. Because yeah, the palette is cheap, but if you use up all your favorite colors and then you can't get refills, you're going to be buying more expensive colors to refill it anyway. So going back to our optical color mixing, where we're layering colors on top of each other to make a secondary color, you can actually optically mix these. You can layer them, you can glaze them, which really surprised me because these things have just been kind of weird and not great for like everything else. I was surprised that I was able to do this without too much reactivation or too much chalkiness or too many problems. As you guys can see, I was able to mix several secondary colors, and I was also able to do some optical mixing where we glaze one color over another. What was really surprising to me for this is we did not get a bunch of color migration like we've been seeing with some of the other student grade paints that we've been reviewing lately. But one of the things I really want to point out is that saturation with these is a joke. You hit your color threshold, you hit your max saturation really early on, and everything else is just kind of like goop on your brush. So if you want to use the SeamiArt watercolors, and I know there are other artists who are using them and are able to make beautiful art with them, I would say probably go for something a little lighter, a little less, you know, mixing colors to get other colors unless you absolutely need to do that, because you do have 50 colors pre-mixed for you. And just trying to avoid bottoming out on saturation. Try to avoid really, really dark colors or really vibrant, intense colors, because while we're able to get a few, for the most part, we're not really able to do much with them. Like, these are a mix of purple and indigo. This should be a really dark color. It's not. It's like a royal blue. It bottoms out really early. This is supposed to be a Payne's gray. You're not really able to get that either. So I think these have some pretty severe limitations when it comes to painting and application, but the only way we're really going to see that for certain is with the field test. So hopefully you guys will stay tuned for that. So now I'm going to do some color lifting, or at least attempt to do some color lifting. These swatches are all pretty small, so, you know, it's not going to give us the best idea. I do apologize for that. Normally I don't review 96 color palettes, so just kind of bear with me. I'm using a synthetic brush. I've got some clean water and some paper towels, and I'm just going to test how prone to lifting these are. So generally with watercolors, you do want to see some lifting. Some colors are going to be more prone to lifting than other colors. Colors that tend to be more granulating, that have a larger pigment or particle size, those are going to be more lifting, whereas more finely milled watercolors, colors that have a really, really, really fine pigmentation that don't really granulate, those are going to be more prone to staining. So even with professional grade, high quality watercolors, you want to see some more prone to lifting and some less prone. Considering these really stayed put when we did our optical mixing, it's gonna surprise probably no one that these are not lifting at all. I feel like there's probably something going on here with the binder. I have no idea what binder they're using, but it doesn't really handle like a honey or a good gum arabic. So it could be a dextrin binder, although those tend to be just really, really weird. But these paints themselves are really dry. They're slower to activate. They're just kind of weird paints. Also, I know the audio in this is just really weird and there's a lot of background noise. I'm still working on getting a studio set up where I can do more noise reduction, so I apologize. I know it's obnoxious, but I appreciate your patience. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me and helping me swatch 96 of these. So, kind of disappointingly, these don't really lift at all. I didn't test the shimmer colors. Those are gonna probably be more prone to lifting because they're mica. They're gonna be a bigger particle size. And for the most part, most of the time, we don't really wanna lift shimmering too much. We're not gonna be doing too much glazing on top of shimmering. Once you've done the shimmer layer, you know, that's basically the end of the illustration usually. But with these, this is a good test for reactivation. This is a good test for whether or not you can do a lot of layering on it. And it's a good test for some of the properties of the paint. And they don't lift, which is kind of in keeping with they don't reactivate, which could be good. It could also be frustrating. It kind of depends on your use case. But these are already a really big puzzle for me. I'm not really sure how I feel about them, and I'm really not sure what to make of them. I have one more test, one final test to do today. I'm going to do the wet into wet test with you guys, and this should give us all the information I need to prepare for the field test. So let me go grab my paper, let me go grab my brushes, and let's do our wet into wet test. Kind of surprisingly to me, these do really well diffused wet into wet, at least while they're still wet. So maybe if you have like a really soft, dreamy feel to your art, or you're not looking to render something very specifically, maybe if you have a more abstract style and you're aiming for something soft and dreamlike, these might be an okay pick for you. I really like the color while it's still wet. We'll have to wait and see how it dries to really be able to tell, because with these watercolors, they've gone down okay wet and then dried. Well, you guys have seen how they've dried. I'm just kind of miffed by this palette, and I don't really like it. Now, I am trying to use a variety of colors. I'm trying to add in a lot of pinks and purples, some peaches, yellows, different greens, different blues. I'm trying to use some more opaque or traditionally opaque colors. I'm also trying to put in some more traditionally transparent colors. And I'm also just dotting in a variety of colors just to see how they layer on top of each other, how they diffuse out, if there's any granulation. And of course, these paints lose a lot of their vibrancy as they dry, which is just so disappointing. For the wet into wet test, we can see that these will diffuse out, maybe even too much. So we do get a good amount of movement, but the background colors almost dried to nothing, especially these lighter colors, the yellows, the peaches, the greens, and even the dots of more saturated color dried pretty pastel. I mean, these were bright red and they've dried now to pink. So this is what a lot of people tend to think watercolor is and watercolor looks like. So there's probably a market that's quite happy with this and it doesn't bother them. For someone like me though, I wouldn't want to reach for this palette expecting bright, vibrant colors and find myself struggling to achieve what I know I can achieve, or struggling to create effects that would otherwise be easy with other watercolors. And this is one of the things that I really want to point out when I'm reviewing these student grade watercolors, is that it's fine for artists who watercolor all the time. We know what we can get out of watercolors. We know what they should be able to do. It's a different case when you're giving these, or someone who's less experienced is purchasing these and they're really struggling against the medium and they're struggling to paint what they can envision. And that's one of the reasons I'm doing this student grade showdown, is people request that I recommend more affordable watercolors or a larger palette so that they're not mixing colors as much. And I'd like to have some good standbys to be able to recommend. And I do have some good standbys. I mean, I've been able to review some really great student grade watercolors and I'm really happy about that. And those have gotten me excited about reviewing student grade watercolors for you guys, because I can see the potential and they can be a little bit more affordable and a little bit more accessible to people who are on a budget. But when I butt my head up against something that, I mean, realistically, I know better. I knew it wasn't going to be the best. I did hear some good things about SeamiArt, so from people whose art I like, so I was hopeful, but I can't say I'm entirely surprised that this handles like this. So these, as I have said, these aren't the worst paints I've ever used, but they sure are kind of neck and neck with some of the worst I've ever used, but at least they're usable. I have purchased watercolors from really budget stores like Dollar Tree and Dollar General and Five Below, and I reviewed them for you guys and they were just not usable. So these are a big step up on those. But how do these compare with some of the other student grade watercolors I've talked about here on the channel in the past? Alright, so unfortunately my Shapiro Farben watercolors are still packed up, so I can't actually show you guys what they look like, but I am going to include a time-lapse segment from the field test, and that'll give you guys an idea of some of the properties I'm talking about. So recently I unboxed and swatched the Mungyo watercolors. They're in a similar price bracket to the SeamiArt watercolors, and I started my student grade showdown, or at least this part of the student grade showdown, with the Cool Bank watercolors, and these are much cheaper. These are about $20.99 on Amazon. So these are the swatches for the Cool Bank watercolors, and I said in my Cool Bank review that these are very much very student grade, almost children's grade, but not the worst. So look, if I can get this open one-handed, you guys can see here we have a bunch of colors, 72 colors in fact. And there's some big hang-ups with this. I honestly did not like any of the accessories in the set that came with it except for the watercolors. But these are watercolor half pans. They come in these sort of cartridges, and then there's a cheap plastic lining, and then inside it's kind of a standardized metal tin, the sort you might get with pencils. So it's small enough that you could easily slip this in your backpack, and other than the lid folding back out, it doesn't have too bad of a footprint on your desk if you have limited space. You get a lot of vibrant color, very, very similar to the SeamiArt. A little bit more lifting though. There's a little bit more color variation, and some of these colors make more sense to me than the SeamiArt watercolors did. But all in all, I said it wasn't bad. I didn't hate it. I wasn't mad at it. And I wanted to reserve my final judgment until I do the field test, which I still haven't done yet. So before I can give you guys a final verdict, I'm kind of hoping to have like a ranked list of my favorite student grade watercolors by the end of all this. So I would say the SeamiArt watercolors are kind of in the same category as the Cool Bank watercolors. I mean, for all I know, they're made by the same company because I'm pretty sure these are being white labeled. Then we have the Mungyo, who actually does white labeling for other companies, and they and I did not get along when I reviewed them. I didn't hate them, but I have a lot of misgivings about them. So I have in some ways reviewed these in the past because Jane Davenport and Pruma Marketing white labels these Korean watercolors. They have a very gritty texture to them. Jane Davenport attributes that to air bubbles. I don't believe it's air bubbles. I think they're just kind of gritty. And they have a tendency to really glop up on your brush, and you can see that when you're painting. So color management is a struggle with these, but you can get darker saturations. You do get some granulation. They are all somewhat lifting, definitely more lifting than the SeamiArt watercolors. And you do get some special effects colors in that you get 4 metallics. Well, you get 3 metallics and a pearl. When it comes to metallics, I'm really picky. I pretty much like the Winsor & Newton gold and silver, the ones that actually have like a solvent base rather than water, and they have brass particles in them rather than like just mica. I really like those, and I really like the fine tech. And then pretty much any other metallics just doesn't really do it for me, other than the ones my friend Kabocha makes. So I'm very, very picky when it comes to metallics, and I don't use them all that often, so I would just ignore these anyway. This is more pricey. This is kind of approaching what you would normally pay for a student grade watercolor palette in the US. It's closer in price point to Winsor Newton's Cotman or Sennelier's La Petite Aquarelle. So I think they're kind of approaching overpriced for the quality, but this is another one that I said I wanted to reserve my final judgment of these until I actually had a chance to sit down and paint an illustration in the field test. And then this is the wet into wet test for that. And you guys can see we actually can achieve more color saturation. It's not the best. There's some serious concerns about these, but we are getting more saturated color. And then when it comes to the SeamiArt, honestly, y'all, I'm just really concerned for the. I'm like afraid of these. Like, ooh, this is a little bit damp, but it's mostly surface wet, so I'm not really that concerned about it. It was mostly around the edges. These are very, very pastel. I think I worked with a similar color gamut for the Mungyo as I did for the SeamiArt. I use similar colors. I tend to like pinks and purples and blues, that sort of thing. And I mean, this looks like children's grade watercolor now that I'm looking at it. And not just because of the colors I picked, but the saturation that it actually dries to. And this looks more like paint that you can actually use. Now, both of them performed quite well in this wet into wet test. Both of them really diffused out on this cotton rag paper. But this, it's almost like I used Crayola, and it's hard to really explain where my problem is until we do the field test and I can actually compare it against other watercolor illustrations that I've painted. And y'all, I hate making ugly art, and this is gonna be like the Mia palette all over again. I'm having flashbacks. It's gonna be bad. Now, I don't have the Shapiro Farben palette in front of me to show you guys, or the resulting field test or the swatches. Those are all still packed up, unfortunately. But that was kind of a good middle of the road, I felt, between the Mei Liang and the Superior, which I really, really like, and the Mia, which I really, really don't like. And I don't actually have the pigment information for the SeamiArt. If you guys do, please send it, because I think they're using some weird stuff in here, especially for like the burnt sienna, and I mean, two of the blues, the Prussian blue and the ultramarine blue, they're basically the same color. And I know usually that's kind of the case in that they're both PB29, but they look different. They're treated different. They look basically the same here. So we don't actually have a good warm blue. And then everything is just so light and so desaturated and very pastel, even though the mass tones look like you might get a little more color. I know that's a lot of optical brightener making them pop in the palette, making them look brighter than they are. But I was hoping to get something close to that. So I'm kind of at a loss here, because there are people who like them, and there are people who can use these to make beautiful watercolor works of art. And I know, I'm looking at this and I'm like, I'm knowing that ain't me. That's not gonna be me. And I'm just, don't like making bad art. But I'll make some bad art for you guys. So if you guys are new here, I am a watercolor comic artist. I paint the webcomic 7" Cara. You guys can check it out at 7inchcara.com, or you can buy it in dead tree format. I'll link those and everything else down in the description below for y'all. And I actually really like to build up my color. I like to do a lot of layers. I like to get some saturation. I like to do a lot of wet into wet effects. So I'm gonna have to think of a field test where I can try to bring the most of this. And honestly, I'm not gonna use, because when it comes to shimmer effects, you can't really see it all that well on the camera. It's never as impressive as it is in person. And the shimmers here are not that impressive anyway. So when I do the field test for this, I'm gonna try to come up with something that I feel like will make it look good and make me look good, but I can still give an honest opinion on them. So that's gonna be kind of a challenge. I may have to hold on to these and think about them for a while, but it's such a bummer because people were like selling me on it, kind of, not overhyping, but saying that they were a decent student grade. And I'm like, did I get a knockoff? You know, because when I first reviewed Paul Rubens, I'm pretty sure I got a knockoff from Wish by accident. But these were from Amazon. These are from the Amazon SeamiArt shop. So I guess this is what it is. I know people are probably like, God, Becca, you should have known. You knew what you were getting into. And I guess I did. I mean, that's part of what makes the Student Grade Showdown interesting, is you're going to get some duds. You might get a lot of duds. So if I were to rank these, I would say, and this is just out of, okay. So I would say if you're looking for good student grade, Meliang pigments, they're cheaper than this. They're like $25. They're made by the same company that makes Paul Rubens. It's their student grade line. I really, really like the Meliang pigments. If you're looking for a different format, the Superior watercolors, especially that folding palette I reviewed for you guys, I love those things. Those were so much fun. My main problem is you're going to use them up real quick, but you're going to use these up real quick too. So it would be like Meliang and Superior kind of tied, then Shapira Farben, Etchers in there somewhere, but I think Etchers kind of overpriced. I really like the Rosa Galleria watercolors, but I really want to classify those as very affordable professional grade watercolors, because they kind of classify themselves as professional grade watercolors. So I hope you guys will check out that review, because I think those are great. And watch, they'll get popular and become expensive. Well, so, then we have we're entering the lower zone. I'm not super sure where to put the Mungyo in comparison to the Cool Bank. I think the Mungyo are probably better than the Cool Bank watercolors, but frankly, where I'm sitting right now, and this isn't the end-all be-all, because I gotta be real, when I was doing the Meliang, the Superior, the Shapira Farben, and the Mia, I thought the Mia was gonna be neck and neck with the Meliang. I thought I might even like the Mia better, and it wasn't until I did the field test where I realized I hated them. They were horrible. So you know, all this could be shuffled as soon as we actually put some paint on a paper and do an actual field test. But as it stands now, I don't like these. This is from the Shapiro Farben field test. So initially when I unboxed and swatched these, I was not impressed. I thought I was gonna like the Mia watercolors a whole lot more. But after doing the Mia field test and the Shapiro Farben field test, my opinion definitely changed. So the Shapiro Farben palette has a whole boatload of colors in this plastic palette. They're held in cartridge style, sort of similar to the Cool Bank palette we just talked about. They're not a standard size half pan, so if you did want to replace them and continue using this palette, you would have to fill it from tubes. They handle decently well wet into wet. You can do decent color mixing, both atomic and glazing, and they stay vibrant once they've dried, which is really important. They don't look as nice as, say, the Mei Liang, which looks a lot more professional when we're talking about a finished watercolor illustration. There's definitely still kind of a student grade vibe to these, but these are so much better than the Mia, and I think so much better than the SeamiArt Watercolor palette. So I would recommend this palette, especially if you're looking for a whole lot of color, over either of those two. I was actually able to paint a watercolor illustration that I wasn't ashamed of, and I enjoyed painting it, which are two of the big important things of watercolor. Even if you're still learning, it's important to be able to paint pieces that you like. What are the pros and cons of this SeamiArt watercolor palette? And I'm fully aware I did not even review the water brush in this one. It seems like the same kind of water brush, except smaller, that came in the Cool Bank kits, and I didn't love those, so I'm just gonna take a pass on that one today. All right, well, the pros. The price is a really big pro for this one. This palette is pretty dang cheap, although there are cheaper palettes available. I paid $29.69 on Amazon. That's pretty standard for inexpensive student grade watercolor palettes. So it's not the cheapest one out there. That might be the Cool Bank. It comes with fun shimmery colors, although they are kind of patchy and they don't really handle that well. It could be fun for younger artists, especially if the shimmery colors is what you're looking for. And you can actually glaze them, which, you know, I hadn't been able to do with some of the other watercolors I reviewed, so that is a big plus. And you can do some color mixing. They promise not to be chalky, but they are really pretty chalky. So what about the cons? And I know everything I just said was like a double-handed compliment. Well, the cons are kind of everything else. They're really desaturated, especially when you compare them to the mass tone in the palette itself. The shimmery colors are kind of desaturated. I mean, they look like Dollar Tree eyeshadow. The regular colors are kind of desaturated compared to the mass tone. It's just kind of disappointing. Usually I'm looking for a lot more color depth than these can offer, and they're kind of chalky. They take forever to activate, so you gotta spritz them and be patient, or you're gonna be scrubbing them with your brush for a while. And then when they are activated, they really glob up on your brush, and you end up, well, a lot of your paint ends up going into your wash cup if you're lucky. So there's gonna be a lot of waste. You're gonna go through these very quickly. There's kind of a false economy with this set. And they dry super desaturated. I mean, that one bummed me out so much I had to mention it twice. Like, it's like a Jekyll and Hyde transformation, because I thought the colors on this when it was still wet were really, really pretty, and they just dried really desaturated, and it's really pretty disappointing. But as much as I'm ragging on these, I'm honestly just really kind of at a loss with them and disappointed. I was really excited about them, and now I'm just kind of like, well, shoot. But I want to be fair, and I want to wait until the field test where I paint a watercolor illustration before I give a final verdict on these. But what's my verdict for now? These are really weird. They're similar in quality to the Cool Bank watercolors I reviewed not too long ago, and they might make an okay gift for kids, but there are better student grade watercolors at the same or a lower price point, and I would really recommend you just give them those instead, like the Mei-Liang pigments or the superior watercolors that we talked about earlier, because they're going to be a lot happier and the watercolors themselves are going to handle a lot better, and they're going to actually be able to paint what they can imagine, which is hugely important. I really hate the recommendation that crummy art supplies could be an okay gift for kids, especially when there are nicer alternatives that cost the same amount. But you know, stay tuned. I may change my song in the upcoming field test. And the fact that there are better alternatives out there, and these are just so desaturated and they just perform so poorly compared to some of their competition, it makes it hard for me to think of anyone I could recommend these to that I wouldn't just recommend those watercolors to. So, you know, at the end of the student grade showdown, I'm going to have a big old rank list of my favorite student grade prices, how many colors you get, because I know that is important, and how much it costs and where you can get it. And hopefully you guys will be able to decide which watercolors are the best watercolors for you. So reviews like today's SeamiArt review would not be possible without the support and help of my amazing patrons on Patreon. Thank you guys so much for making this possible. And this student grade showdown wouldn't be possible without their support either. So if you're finding this helpful, useful, and informative, if these reviews are making it possible for you to pursue your artistic goals and to make art a habit, or you're doing a little bit of research before you start your Christmas shopping, which good on you, you might want to consider joining me over on Patreon. Not only will you help support reviews like this one here, but your financial support also goes towards supporting tutorials, because those do use consumables and do take up a lot of time. And you will also get early access to my reviews and tutorials, and you get to feel awesome for helping me make content like this. So huge thank you to my patrons yet again. Thank you guys so much for helping me create these reviews. It really means a lot to me. This has been such a fun thing to share with you guys. So what did you guys think of the SeamiArt watercolor kit? Were you impressed or were you disappointed, especially compared to some of the other student grade watercolors we've talked about here on the channel? I have kind of mixed feelings. It's got a really large color selection that includes normal colors as well as some somewhat unimpressive shimmer colors. But unfortunately, even on a cotton rag watercolor paper, it just doesn't swatch that well. You can mix color with it, both doing optical glazing and atomic glazing, and that's great, but the color saturation just isn't what I was hoping for. It does handle wet into wet, but it just doesn't have the oomph of some of the other student grade watercolors that I've talked about here in the past. So really, I'm going to reserve my final judgment for the field test. I'm definitely a little anxious about it, and I hope you guys will consider subscribing and sticking around for that. I am reviewing a bunch of student grade watercolors as part of my student grade showdown, hoping that it will help you guys find the right art supplies for you, especially if you're on a budget. But if you're looking for a little bit more higher end, if you're looking for something that'll really last you the test of time, I regularly review professional grade watercolors here on the channel. And if you are not familiar with my art and illustration whatsoever, I am a watercolor comic artist, so I have a fun, very saturated, cartoony style that I think you guys will enjoy, and I hope you guys will check it out. I'll have links to my Instagram, my portfolio, and my webcomic down in the description below. So hopefully this gave you guys the information you needed, whether you want to buy or pass on the SeamiArt palette. If you guys enjoyed this review, let me know. Give me a big old thumbs up and let me know what other student grade watercolors you're interested in seeing me try out down in the comments. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. I hope you guys stay safe, happy, and healthy. And hopefully this review is part of helping you guys make art a habit. So, bye guys!